Welcome, beloved anointed ones. When they can't buy you, bribe you, or break you, the only option left is to blacklist you. That's the unspoken rule of every elite circle, every so-called untouchable group that thrives on power and exclusivity. They want the world to believe they're rejecting you, when in reality, they're suffocating under the quiet terror of your survival. Think about it. History shows us that empires don't crumble because of armies. They collapse because of the one person, the one idea, the one presence they couldn't control. And here's the twist. You're not outside their plans because you're unworthy. You're outside because you're uncontrollable. Let's be real for a second. If you were truly irrelevant, they wouldn't waste an ounce of energy keeping tabs on you, whispering your name behind closed doors, or blocking your path at every turn. Blacklists aren't for nobodies. They're for disruptors. And the fact that you ended up on one is the clearest proof that you carry something their carefully guarded world can't digest. But here's the part that almost makes me laugh. These elite groups parade around like they're choosing who to allow in. But the truth is, their biggest fear is who might outgrow them without permission. Spoiler alert, that's you. They aren't worried about your absence at their tables. They're panicked about the fact that you built your own without their invitation. So while they huddle together in secrecy, whispering strategies on how to outlast you, here's the irony. You're not applying for their acceptance. They're applying for survival. And they know their time is running short. Welcome to the Blacklist file. Elite groups aren't recruiting you. They're desperate to survive you. Number 1. You are the variable. They can't predict. You are the variable they can't predict. And that's what makes you the biggest threat to their system. For generations, elite groups have thrived by studying patterns. They measure behavior, calculate reactions, and set traps they're certain most people will fall into. It's how they stay in control. They depend on predictability. The average person is easy to read because fear, greed, and ego work like clockwork. Offer them comfort, and they'll settle. Threaten them with loss, and they'll obey. But then you came along, and none of those switches turned you the way they expected. Their blueprint failed the moment it touched your life. They can't place you in a category, and that infuriates them. People who break the mold always unsettle those who build their kingdoms on order and control. You don't react to their pressures the way they rehearsed, and that leaves them without a script. It's not that you're trying to be unpredictable, it's that you're too authentic to play the roles they assign. When you refuse to bend to fear, when you can't be seduced by rewards, when you don't collapse under isolation, you become an equation that can't be solved. To them, you are chaos in human form, and that chaos exposes how fragile their system really is. What they can't stand most is that you didn't have to study them to outmaneuver them. You weren't sitting in boardrooms decoding strategies or learning their tricks. Your unpredictability comes naturally because you operate from something they don't believe in: truth. Truth doesn't follow formulas. Truth isn't dictated by bribes or intimidation. Truth can't be rehearsed or staged. It shows up raw and unfiltered, and every time you've responded from a place of truth, you've thrown their carefully designed control into confusion. Being the variable they can't predict doesn't just frustrate them, it exhausts them. It forces them to waste resources, time, and energy trying to anticipate your next move, while you keep moving forward without even playing their game. And deep down, they know it. They've built a system that can control almost anyone. But not you. You don't belong to their programming. That's why they can't recruit you. It's also why they can't survive you. Because when a single, unpredictable person enters a predictable system, that system begins to break from within. Number 2. Your existence dismantles their blueprint. Your existence dismantles their blueprint because you are living proof their plan had a hole in it from the start. These groups construct ideas of inevitability, rigid narratives about who holds power, who deserves access, and which people are expendable. Those narratives become tools, recruitment scripts, loyalty tests, reward systems. When someone like you shows up and refuses to fit those lines, the whole story loses its authority. Your life contradicts the assumptions they've sold to everyone else, and contradictions are fatal for control. They invested in a version of reality where outcomes are ensured, People will trade comfort for silence, status for obedience, safety for complicity. Your life shows that trade isn't universal. You didn't sign the contract they assumed everyone would sign. That matters because their systems depend on modeled behavior. If their models fail even once, they must reassess the whole architecture. Reassessment costs them power. It forces them to admit mistakes, to question who they trusted, and to explain why their safeguards didn't hold. Admissions like that spread faster than any lie they can craft. You also break their recruitment pipeline because you expose the pretense behind their promises. They entice people with prestige, access, influence, but you, by simply existing outside their orbit, reveal that those perks are conditional and manufactured. People begin to see the agreement for what it is, a transaction where the price is surrender. When one person lives without paying that price and still thrives, the negotiation they use loses its leverage. Their offers look less irresistible and more like traps. That shift is subtle, but it is lethal over time. Dismantling a blueprint doesn't require a manifesto. It happens when your daily choices refuse to validate their assumptions. It happens when you hold your ground without fanfare, when you succeed without their stamp, and when you forgive yourself enough to stop seeking their approval. Each of those small, steady acts chips away at the foundation of control that depends on universal compliance. Worst for them is that people respond to evidence. Once the idea takes root that their system can fail, it becomes contagious. The blueprint isn't a single document, it's a culture. Cultures die when their stories are disproven. Your existence is a running counterexample their leaders can't simply erase. That's why they don't try to recruit you. They blacklist you instead because controlling your narrative would require admitting their own design was flawed, and acknowledgement is the end game for any empire built on the illusion of being unbreakable. Number 3, they don't fear losing you. They fear exposure through you. They don't fear losing you. They fear being exposed by you. That difference changes everything. Losing a person can be handled with replacements, press releases, and a couple of staged apologies. Being exposed is corrosive. It eats at the architecture of their influence until there's nothing left to hide behind. When you exist as a living record, when your story, your scars, your choices contradict their polished narrative, every secret they've banked on becomes a problem that compounds. Exposure isn't a one-time hit. It's a slow, relentless accounting that reveals patterns, names, dates, and the tiny mechanical cruelty that made their power possible. Exposure cuts their transactions into pieces. Deals promised in back rooms start looking like deals made under duress. Promises of protection become memos of silence bought with favors. When you step forward, your truth forces observers to connect dots that were always there, but deliberately blurry. The more clear those dots become, the less plausible their storylines sound. They can't spin every inconvenient truth away without looking defensive, and defensiveness reads like guilt on the public ledger. They panic because exposure is social and viral, and it multiplies faster than any internal policy they can enact. A single testimony makes people reevaluate past choices, and that reevaluation spreads. Allies begin to distance themselves. Contracts are reread through a different lens. People who once benefited from the system start to see a ledger where their names are written in ink that won't be hidden. Their world is built on selective memory and curated appearances, and you break that by being a consistent, honest record. There's also an internal threat that exposure creates which they understand better than anyone: accountability. Leaders who have depended on secrecy know how destructive accountability can be. It forces organizational changes that threaten current structures of power. It brings legal risk, and it opens their decision-making to public scrutiny. That kind of pressure is not something their networks are comfortable absorbing. It requires transparency, and transparency is the exact opposite of what these groups sell. So their strategy is not recruitment. Recruitment would mean admitting you have value in their terms. Instead, they blacklist, marginalize, and discredit. They would rather make you invisible to the audiences they control than invite the collapse that your truth would start. Their fear is not sentimental. It is strategic. You are the proof that their system is neither inevitable nor indestructible. And proof is the most dangerous currency they have ever faced. Number 4. Their secret weapon is obedience, you don't have it. Their secret weapon is obedience, and you don't have it. These elite systems are built like clockwork. Rituals, scripts, favors, and an invisible price tag for every advantage. Recruitment isn't about who's brilliant or brave. It's about who will follow the rules without asking why. Obedience turns messy human beings into predictable instruments. It's easier to control a person who raises their hand when told and smiles when punished. That's why they invest so much in shaping behavior, because a compliant person reduces risk, protects secrets, and increases the lifespan of the whole machine. When you refuse to play along, everything they rely on becomes unstable. You don't bow to their rituals, you don't mirror their language, and you don't stoop to the petty compromises that keep their world running. That refusal is contagious. People see you not bending and start to question the bargains they themselves made. The empire doesn't fear the nonconformist for their ideas alone. It fears the ripple effect of someone who won't comply. Their tactics, gaslighting, subtle rewards, social isolation are designed to manufacture obedience, to make compromise feel like common sense. You survived those tactics without folding. You kept your spine when they offered comfort for silence, power for compliance, safety for obedience. That makes you radioactive to their institutions. They can't let you inside because you'd refuse the clauses that keep the house upright. Recruit you and you might dismantle the unwritten contract at the heart of it all. Worse, once inside, you'd model another way to live, a way that doesn't hinge on selling out. The moment one person demonstrates principled refusal, the foundation trembles. So instead of courting you, they blacklist you, delegitimize you, and build walls to keep your influence at bay. They'd rather smear you than admit that their scaffolding only works with willing workers. You not having obedience is not a minor inconvenience for them, it's a strategic crisis. Obedience is their glue, and you are the solvent. Every refusal, every honest answer, every boundary you hold pulls at the seams of their system. That's why you're not a recruitable asset to be polished and promoted. You're the threat that forces them to reinvent defense, to spend energy on containment rather than expansion. They can tolerate talent. They cannot tolerate someone who refuses to be tamed. Number 5. You carry immunity to their old tricks. They used predictable weapons on you: shame, pressure, dangling favors, threats. And each time those tools failed to bend you, they miscalculated the one variable they count on: repeatable obedience. Trauma was supposed to make you pliable. Instead, it taught you boundaries. Bribes were supposed to create loyalty. Instead, they taught you what price you won't pay. Fear was supposed to silence you. Instead, it taught you how to choose your fights. Guilt was supposed to keep you small. Instead, it taught you how to separate responsibility from manipulation. Those experiences didn't give you scars that make you fragile. They gave you immunity. That immunity isn't some noble cloak. It's practical, tactical, and deeply unsettling to anyone who depends on predictable human reactions. When someone has already been tested by the worst of the system and still stands, their reactions no longer match the cheat sheet the elite use to manage people. The playbook, offer comfort, punish resistance, reward compliance, stops working because you've already seen every page and refused to sign. You move through conversations and offers with a kind of calibrated skepticism that makes coercion expensive and influence unreliable. People who haven't been through that gauntlet still respond to small incentives and social pressure. You don't. You see the transaction for what it is, and you refuse to exchange your agency for short-term relief. That makes you immune and, crucially, contagious. Others notice that the usual levers no longer produce the same results, and that observation spreads. This immunity breaks their most profitable assumptions. Their networks rely on behavior that can be predicted, incentivized, and monitored. When enough people show signs of the same resistance you display, when compliance rates drop, when favors no longer guarantee loyalty, the system's cost curve shifts. It becomes harder and riskier to maintain control. That's what terrifies them. Not that you're talented or loud, but that you are proof their methods are failing. Proof is a problem they can't paper over with PR or empty gestures. It invites questions, reviews, and accountability. So they react like any fragile system would, with containment, discrediting, and exclusion. Recruit you, and you might teach others the same immunity. Keep you out and hope your example stays small. But immunity spreads, and once it reaches a tipping point, their old tricks become obsolete. That's not an abstract threat to them. It's an extinction-level problem for any empire built on predictable obedience. Number 6. Your authenticity is an untreatable disease to their lies. Your authenticity is an untreatable disease to their lies. When everyone else is practicing a polished, rehearsed honesty, smiles calibrated for optics, compliments engineered to reward obedience, you show up without the script. Your words and actions aren't designed to soothe an audience or to secure a favor. They are direct, messy, and human. That rawness reveals the seams in the stories they spend fortunes stitching together. It doesn't shout. It simply refuses to play along. And that refusal slowly corrodes the narrative they rely on. They build castles of image, selective histories, flattering portraits, and choreography that makes cruelty look like necessity. Those constructs need cover, actors, and constant performance. Authenticity doesn't lend itself to costume changes. It doesn't bow at the right moments or laugh when the room expects laughter. It points out mismatches between what is said and what is done, between public postures and private transactions. Over time, those mismatches are like light through a crack, small at first, but enough to let others see what's been hidden. What makes your truth a contagion is its credibility. When you speak plainly about what happened, when you refuse to rewrite your memory to preserve someone's reputation, your testimony becomes a single, dependable reference point. People who are tired of being coached by appearances begin to use you as a measure. If your version of events holds up without spin, their carefully curated reality starts to look optional. That forces allies into choices. Keep performing, or start answering for the contradictions your honesty exposes. Performance is expensive. Accountability is cheaper, for everyone else, but devastating to those who built the performance. They react to authenticity the way an immune system reacts to a virus. Their first move is denial or ridicule, anything to maintain the illusion that nothing is wrong. When that fails, they weaponize ambiguity, rewrite timelines, leak alternate narratives, manufacture confusion. That's not strength. It's panic disguised as strategy. Authenticity makes those maneuvers visible because it demands consistency, not rhetoric. Your steady truth compels coherence. Their stories fracture under the pressure. The scariest thing for them is that authenticity scales. One uncompromising life can shift expectations across a room, then a community, and then an entire culture. It lowers the tolerance for staged virtue and raises the demand for real accountability. Empires that trade in curated illusions cannot survive sustained exposure to unvarnished truth. You are not a threat because you are loud or famous. You are a threat because you are real, and reality, once released, can't be quarantined. Number 7. They don't want you at the table because you'd flip it. They don't want you at the table because you would flip it. Having you inside isn't a prize for them, it's a liability. You would make the deal visible in ways they've spent lifetimes hiding. At the table, decisions are presented as neutral, carefully framed as merit-based or unavoidable. That framing is their currency. Your presence forces air into the room, making the choreography obvious: who benefits, who pays, what concessions were traded under the table. Once someone with integrity starts asking the small, obvious questions they've cancelled for years, the whole performance collapses. You wouldn't simply take a seat. You'd rewrite the script by refusing to consent to the backstage bargains they pass off as governance. They understand influence as a closed circuit where privileges flow to compliant hands. You would interrupt that flow. Where they expect nods and rehearsed gratitude, you'd demand clarity. Where they expect silence, you'd insist on records. That behavior shatters plausible deniability because it invites witnesses to compare the official story with the lived result. Those comparisons aren't subtle. People notice when outcomes consistently favor the same insiders and when dissenting voices are excluded. You would be the one who points out the pattern out loud, and patterns are harder to hide than single mistakes. When patterns are exposed, followers stop believing in fairness. They start seeing design. And the moment followers see design, loyalty drains away. Keeping you out is cheaper than absorbing you. It's less risky to blacklist someone than to let them in and risk a chain reaction of accountability. In their calculus, a smear campaign or quiet exclusion buys more stability than debate. It prevents precedents that might empower others to demand the same protections you would. They fear precedents because precedent is contagious. One person who refuses to play along sets expectations for the next person, and then the next. That's how systems that rely on secrecy erode, not through spectacular revolts, but through a steady refusal to validate the rules. Worse for them, if you entered and flipped the table, you wouldn't just reveal corruption. You'd humanize the consequences. You'd show who suffers when the table is skewed, and what ordinary people lose when power is packaged as inevitability. That kind of visibility turns apathy into outrage, so they choose containment over collaboration. They blacklist you not because you're useless to them, but because you're useful to everyone else in a way they can't afford. Your presence threatens their position not by being oppositional for show, but by being uncompromisingly truthful, and truth at the table is the one thing their empire can't survive. Number 8, their desperation is proof of decline. When a group starts blacklisting instead of building, it's not strategy, it's triage. Healthy institutions expand by adding talent, by absorbing rivals, by turning critics into contributors. That's how influence grows. Broaden the tent, collect resources, make opponents less threatening by giving them stakes. Blacklisting is the opposite move. It's a withdrawal from the marketplace of ideas and power. It says, we can't afford the cost of change, so we'll try to freeze the world instead. That freeze is a confession. It reveals they've run out of convincing arguments, useful recruits, or safe ways to refresh their ranks. They're not operating from confidence. They're patching leaks. When elites recruit, they win twice. They gain new capability, and they neutralize potential opposition. Recruitment is a signal of surplus of resources, surplus of legitimacy, surplus of strategy. Blacklisting is a signal of scarcity. It costs less in the short term to exclude than to convert. It feels like control because it narrows the visible threat. But exclusion is a defensive posture, and defense is never the long-term playbook of a thriving power. It's the last-ditch move of an empire that's already lost momentum. Their choice to blacklist is also a cultural indicator. Organizations that believe in their model tolerate debate, mistakes, and even dissent because those things can be steered. Defensive groups treat any variance as contamination. That fear-driven behavior produces rituals of secrecy, increased policing of insiders, and a litany of micro-controls that slow everything down. Talent avoids rigid systems. Creators, innovators, and the honest people who keep institutions relevant see the walls and walk away. Over time, the group becomes smaller but louder, less representative but more paranoid. That's decline disguised as purity. Blacklisting also broadcasts a truth to outsiders. The elite thinks the problem isn't that the world disagrees with them. It's that the world might learn from you. If your presence threatens their longevity, they ban your influence rather than fixing the rot. That reveals a key weakness. They judge survival by short-term order rather than adaptability. Adaptability wins when environments shift, but a frightened institution clings to rituals that once worked and forgets why they worked in the first place. So their desperation is evidence, not conjecture. It's measurable in the way they hoard information, in how quickly they crush dissent, and in how often they choose exile over engagement. When someone is blacklisted, remember, exclusion is their defense, and defense is the last honest admission that the system is failing. The blacklist is less a sentence for you than a public obituary for their confidence. Number 9. Your silence isn't power, your existence is. Your presence changes the rules. They spend fortunes crafting narratives, controlling stages, and training spokespeople to deliver the right lines at the right moment. They believe power lives in sound, statements, press conferences, polished defenses. What they fail to understand is that power also lives in proof, the steady fact of you walking around, surviving and refusing to be reshaped. You don't have to give a speech, leak a file, or stage a dramatic reveal. People will watch the gap between what they were told and what actually exists, and that gap is where their authority collapses. Survival is evidence. When you show up to the same street, the same job, the same family gatherings, carrying scars the system intended to erase, you force the world to reconcile the tidy stories they sold with actual outcomes. Your unedited life draws attention away from crafted explanations toward simple, unavoidable truth. The optics of a powerful group depend on consistency between appearance and reality. Your existence makes that consistency impossible. That's why you're a problem even when you're quiet. Your behavior models an alternative. People around you don't need a manifesto, they need an example. When they see someone who refused to exchange integrity for comfort, someone who stayed upright through storms, they begin to internalize a new baseline for what's acceptable. That baseline shifts expectations. Once expectations shift, the elite's scripted responses stop landing. Promises of reform look hollow because the proof, your steady life, says otherwise. Influence begins to leak away, not through speeches, but through comparisons that ordinary people make every day. They panic because containment costs less than transformation. It's easier to ignore a loud critic than to explain decades of missteps to an audience that now questions them. But ignoring you doesn't erase you. Every time you move through a room with dignity, you puncture a lie. You force onlookers to pick a side. Keep believing the practiced image or trust their own eyes. That pressure is subtle but cumulative, and institutions crumble under subtle, cumulative pressure faster than under sudden shocks. So your power is not about volume, it's about veracity. The quiet fact of your survival is a living counter-argument to their entire architecture of control. They can smear, discredit, and build barriers, but they cannot manufacture your life. That's why your existence, calm, relentless, undeniable, is the single most destabilizing thing you carry. Number 10. They study you like a threat file, not a recruit. They study you like a threat file, not a recruit. Every meeting about you has a different tone. There's no excitement, no pitch deck, no polite outreach. It's procurement of countermeasures, who to vet, what to obscure, which channels to monitor. They aren't brainstorming how to use your talents. They're mapping how your presence might unravel agreements, expose beneficiaries, or inspire copycats. That change in posture tells you everything. You aren't an asset to be polished. You're a risk to be neutralized. When organizations treat a person as a liability, the language shifts from potential to perimeter. Analysts replace talent scouts. Conversations that might have once been about mentoring become audits and watch lists. They inventory every connection you have and every place you might speak. They test narratives against your likely responses and run simulations designed to make you irrelevant. The goal isn't to win you over, it's to make you smaller in public perception. That's containment, and containment is a defensive economy. Cheaper, dirtier, and built on suppression rather than transformation. This approach reveals what they value most: stability, secrecy, and control of the narrative. A recruit can be assimilated and turned into a steward of the system. A threat must be managed, and failing that, isolated. Managing threats demands resources, legal teams, influence operatives, smear campaigns, and a constant stream of small interventions to blunt momentum. Those interventions are not random. They're choices that reveal fear. Every time they choose containment over conversation, they confirm that your existence is corrosive to their assumptions. Containment also multiplies harm in indirect ways. While they focus on making you invisible within their circles, they underestimate the opposite effect. People outside those circles notice. The more energy spent camouflaging you, the more obvious their insecurity becomes. Outsiders start asking why they're so desperate to hide you. That curiosity breeds solidarity. People who feel excluded recognize the pattern and begin to connect your story to their own. What was meant to be a firewall becomes a flare. Finally, being treated as a threat is a compliment wrapped in hostility. It means you represent a real failure in a system designed to preempt dissent. It means you're visible enough to matter and resilient enough to persist. They'd prefer to convert you, but conversion would force them to change. So they choose containment instead. They study the file, circulate the memos, and tighten the perimeter, because admitting you're right would demand the very accountability their survival depends on. Number 11, you represent the end of manufactured hierarchies. Your life proves the end of manufactured hierarchies because it undermines the whole fantasy that power is a commodity passed down or sold. For centuries, they taught people to bow to lineage, titles, and signatures as the only valid proofs of worth. They built institutions around scarcity, privileges kept behind doors, networks guarded like vaults, and opportunities parceled out as if greatness required a certificate. You, refusing to wait for their permission, shows everyone that access can appear outside their ledger. That revelation is contagious and enormously destabilizing. When someone rises without their blessing, it exposes the transaction they hoped would remain invisible. The idea that influence must be brokered through private channels suddenly looks like a designed bottleneck, not a natural order. People who grew up believing that respect follows a pedigree start to question why talent, integrity, and contribution were discounted in favor of inheritance and favor trading. Your example rewrites the unspoken rules. Competence and courage begin to matter more than connections and endorsements. That shift reorders incentives across whole communities. Manufactured hierarchies survive by convincing people that the ladder is the only way up. They sell the myth of scarcity so everyone competes for crumbs. When you succeed outside those structures, you reveal the myth for what it is, an artificial scarcity maintained by gatekeeping. The consequence is that loyalty to the old order weakens. People who once defended the gates find themselves uncomfortable with the explanations they handed down to justify exclusion. The social glue that held those hierarchies together begins to loosen, because it was always adhesive, made from fear and habit, not necessity. Worse for them, your existence creates alternative pathways that are hard to criminalize without looking petty. New leaders emerge who don't wear the approved uniform. New alliances form that aren't brokered in private rooms. That plurality makes it harder for any single elite to monopolize influence. Influence becomes distributed and therefore resilient. Systems designed for monopoly crumble under distributed pressure because they weren't built to share power, only to hoard it. This is why the old guard reacts with alarm rather than indifference. They don't fear your talent. They fear the precedent your life sets. If greatness can arrive unannounced, their business model of exclusivity is obsolete. They can blacklist individuals, but they can't unteach a generation that watched someone succeed without their stamp. The end of manufactured hierarchies isn't theatrical, it's structural. It's the slow, irreversible reallocation of trust from institutions to people who actually earn it. And when trust rebalances that way, their castles of curated privilege begin to look exactly like what they are: fragile, man-made props propped up by fear. Number 12. They fear the masses seeing themselves in you. They fear the masses seeing themselves in you because it destroys the illusion that greatness must be sanctioned. Every elite system depends on the perception that only a select few are capable, worthy, or allowed to succeed. That perception keeps people compliant, keeps them striving for approval instead of autonomy. When your life proves otherwise, when the world sees that you weren't chosen by them, yet you thrived anyway, it shatters that carefully maintained hierarchy. People begin to realize they don't need invitations, signatures, or endorsements to achieve what they were told was unreachable. This realization terrifies the powerful because it undermines control. Gatekeepers rely on scarcity. Scarcity is their leverage. They convince people that access is limited and that the rules are rigid, and in return, they extract obedience, resources, and loyalty. If the masses recognize your example, that leverage evaporates. Suddenly, the rules look arbitrary, the scarcity artificial, and the gatekeepers themselves vulnerable. Their authority depends not on competence, but on the illusion that access cannot exist outside their approval. You, simply by existing and thriving, expose that lie. What makes this so dangerous for them is the ripple effect. When one person succeeds without permission, observers start to question why others couldn't. Communities begin to compare stories, to analyze patterns, and to notice opportunities that were previously invisible. The walls they built start to feel thinner, and the psychological hold they maintained weakens. They've spent decades teaching people to look up, to wait, to conform, and here you are walking past all the rules they set, unscathed and unrepentant. That fear goes deeper than optics. It's existential. If ordinary people see that their potential isn't contingent on elite validation, the entire system's relevance comes into question. Influence, privilege, and even wealth appear less like natural rewards and more like carefully maintained hoards. Their monopoly on power becomes not a mark of superiority but a vulnerability. That is why they react with containment, blacklisting, and smear campaigns. They're trying to stop an idea from spreading, not just an individual. In short, your existence is contagious proof. It tells the world that gatekeepers are optional, not essential. And for any institution that has thrived by convincing billions that they are indispensable, that revelation is catastrophic. Your life demonstrates that independence is possible, success is possible, and influence can be reclaimed. For them, that is the ultimate threat, a world that no longer needs them. Number 13. You break the myth of exclusivity. You break the myth of exclusivity because your existence exposes the lie they've sold for generations, that greatness requires permission. Elite systems package success like a luxury item, wrapped in rituals, titles, and secret networks. They make scarcity look natural, as if only the chosen few are capable of impact or influence. Your life proves that scarcity is manufactured. You achieved, survived, and excelled outside their approval. You are greatness on your own terms, untouched by their seal, unconstrained by their ceremonies. That fact alone is corrosive to the empire they've built on curated access. What makes this dangerous for them is not that you're talented, but that you are uncontainable. Greatness in their world is transactional. They offer prestige to those who perform, obey, or conform. By rejecting that contract, by thriving without it, you reveal the foundation of their promises. It isn't earned, it's granted. They cannot manufacture your existence or reproduce your path because you didn't require their scaffolding. Every measure they take to control, recruit, or influence others becomes hollow when someone like you proves that their endorsements aren't necessary for excellence. Your example also rewires perception. People conditioned to believe that the only route to achievement passes through elite hands begin to question why the gatekeepers exist at all. If one person can succeed without approval, others see the illusion for what it is, a marketing campaign for scarcity designed to extract loyalty, attention, and resources. That awareness spreads. It makes recruitment harder, influence weaker, and control more fragile. What was supposed to be a self-perpetuating system of power now looks like a house of cards. The most threatening part for them is psychological. They can't erase you and they can't copy you. You are proof that influence can arise organically, that impact is not a favor to be granted. The people they've groomed to idolize initiation begin to see that initiation is irrelevant. That realization undermines not just authority but the very story that justifies their monopoly on power. In short, your greatness is proof of independence. You embody what they claim to manufacture but cannot, and that gap terrifies them. You aren't just outside their system, you invalidate it. You are the truth they spend lifetimes trying to hide. That greatness doesn't need permission, and influence can emerge anywhere, even where it isn't invited. Number 14. Your legacy doesn't require their stage. Your legacy doesn't require their stage because what you carry isn't dependent on their validation. They can blacklist you, silence your name in private rooms, erase your presence from their newsletters, or deny you access to the platforms where influence is traditionally measured. But none of that touches the core of what you bring into the world. Your impact isn't a performance they control. It's a force that exists independently of their permission. Destiny doesn't check for invitations, and influence doesn't need their seal to be real. What you carry moves beyond walls, hierarchies, and curated networks because it was never meant to be confined. This terrifies them because their power relies on boundaries. If they can contain someone, they can control perception. But your legacy operates in a space they cannot monitor. It grows in whispers, in unseen acts of courage, in the small ripples of change you create every day. Your contributions don't require a spotlight or an audience pre-approved by them. They exist in the minds of people you inspire, in the decisions you shift, in the culture you touch without asking for permission. That is freedom and power wrapped together, and no amount of blacklisting can touch it. The more they try to erase you, the more obvious it becomes that what they fear isn't influence, it's inevitability. You don't need their stage because you were never meant to perform for them. The tools they wield, access, networks, prestige, matter to the obedient, the dependent, and the scripted. You operate outside that economy. Every achievement, every life you impact, every lesson you carry forward bypasses the structures they think define success. That invisibility to them is your shield and your weapon. What makes this so dangerous is the permanence of it. Platforms can be restricted, voices silenced, names blacklisted, but your legacy is durable because it is anchored in action and truth, not in approval or proximity. People will remember what you did, what you taught, and how you survived, long after the gates they guard have crumbled. They can control narratives, but they cannot control history, and they cannot contain destiny. Ultimately, your life proves that you are ungovernable in the most profound way. Your influence and your legacy are self-generated. You do not wait for permission, you do not seek validation, and you do not bend to a system designed to limit what can grow. Their walls may stand, but what you carry flows freely, unstoppable, untouchable, and eternal. Every point we've explored paints the same truth in bold, unflinching lines. You're not meant to be controlled, bought, or contained. From the moment you walked past their algorithms, past their rituals, past their gatekeepers, you became something they cannot understand and cannot survive quietly. You are unpredictable, untouchable, immune to their tricks, and raw in a way that exposes the rot behind their illusions. While they scramble to contain you, smear you, and blackmail perception, your existence continues to dismantle their carefully constructed empires. Your life proves that greatness does not need permission, that influence cannot be bought, and that true legacy cannot be blacklisted. They fear you because you invalidate everything they built, their hierarchies, their narratives, their sense of inevitability. Your survival and authenticity are the proof they cannot erase, the evidence that all their plans to dominate, manipulate, and orchestrate human behavior have limits. They see the masses in you, and that terrifies them, because once others realize what you've shown, the illusion of control collapses. You do not need their stage, their circles, or their approval to leave your mark. Your influence spreads in ways they can't calculate, and your legacy flows where no walls or blacklists can stop it. Ultimately, this isn't about revenge, recognition, or rebellion. It's about truth. Your life is the demonstration that systems built on fear, deception, and exclusivity are vulnerable when faced with someone unwilling to bend. Your story teaches the world that resilience, integrity, and independence are the ultimate disruptors. And while they scramble to protect themselves from what they cannot understand, you continue walking freely, proving that their desperation is your silent victory. So stand in that reality. Own your presence, your survival, and your influence. They may try to erase you from their maps, but your journey is already written in history. Every step you take, every choice you make, and every life you touch chips away at their illusions, leaving only the undeniable truth: you are unstoppable, untouchable, and uncontainable. If this resonated with you, don't stay silent, make your presence felt. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the truth others are trying to hide. Like this video to show you're awake to what really matters. Comment below and share your thoughts. Your perspective matters, and your voice strengthens the movement. And don't forget to share this with anyone who needs to see that power, survival, and authenticity can't be contained. This is your space. Own it, amplify it, and let the world see what they can't control. God bless you.